Why do organizations so often make decisions that look good on paper but don't actually do much? Why do governments or corporations keep putting out polished statements instead of solving real problems? A lot of time it's not about outcomes, it's about appearances. Hello, I am Professor Hedstrom, and in this video we'll look at institutional theory, which is another powerful meso-level lens that helps explain why institutions are often stay locked into course even when it no longer makes sense. Institutional theory, it focuses on how social norms, rules, and expectations shape organizational behavior. This is very different from theories that assume that decision makers are just rational actors trying to maximize outcomes or pursue their own interest. Here, the focus is on how legitimacy, looking like you're doing the right thing in the eyes of the public partners, or just your peers, can be as important as effectiveness. In this case, the organization is trying to justify its existence to the public. Four concepts are key here to institutional theory. Social constructions, so the theory argues that organizations and their standard operating procedures are socially constructed and thus take up a life of their own in their social environment. It's not just a set of regulatory boundaries. Institutionalization argues that over time, procedures become so ingrained in an organization that they become taken for granted as the legitimate, the natural way of doing things. Challenging institutionalized practices is much harder than changing non-institutionalized practices. Isomorphism captures how organizations tend to voluntarily adopt authoritative structures or practices existing in their environment. If everybody else is doing it, it must be the right thing. Change occurs when an authoritative organization decides to take an organizational change in some fashion and then gains status and prestige for having done so successfully, or having been perceived as having done so successfully. This is where organizational consultants come in, and they will take examples from the corporate world. This huge company, it could be IBM, Microsoft, Toyota, etc. They change their way of doing things, and then they will go out and on conferences and talk about these successes, and organizations will buy the services of these consultants to mimic what the big ones have done. Diversity of application. There's many types of institutions. It's not just organizations that can be seen as institutions. Institutions can also be practices that we're expected to adhere to. So there's several different such practices we could talk about. Regulative, these are the formal rules and laws that become so ingrained that it's very hard to challenge them, like a set of laws that are important to the political culture. Normative, that are unwritten rules, cultural norms, norms that everybody adheres to because breaking them would be socially unacceptable. Cognitive, so this talks more about a group's shared meanings and beliefs, like a corporate culture. Note how important culture and legitimacy is in the through line here. So let's say that you're running a government agency working on climate policy. You've got the data, you've got the experts, you've got the authority to make bold changes. But instead of pushing ahead with more radical reforms, you opt to align with the Paris Agreement, which is an international benchmark. Why? Because doing so signals to voters, NGOs, international allies that you are a responsible actor. Even if this policy doesn't tackle the unique problems in your country, the move earns legitimacy, which can matter more politically than outcomes and real-world results. Real-world example of this could be how universities and corporations have adopted diversity statements and anti-racist days of professional development after the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. A lot of these initiatives were high visibility, low impact mission statements, committees, symbolic gestures. Why not overhaul the organization more aggressively? Because those reforms risk pushback from power-holding gatekeepers. But symbolic compliance with dominant social values, that preserves institutional credibility without upsetting the status quo. That's the institutional theory at work. Acting in ways that make them look legitimate in the eyes of the stakeholders, even if the change is mostly on a surface level. Over time, these kinds of norms that institutional theory is talking about, they can become embedded. They harden into institutional routines. They start to shape the perceptions of the members. Change doesn't even feel like a valid option. You might want to innovate, but you still end up coloring inside the lines. So if you ever wondered why organizations seem to talk the talk but rarely walk the walk, this theory provides a compelling answer. It's not just about solving problems. It's about maintaining the status quo and navigating expectations and surviving in an environment where being seen to do the right thing is often more important than actually doing it. This theory is good for understanding how organizations need to fit into a broader cultural and institutional framework. Legitimacy often matters as much as, or even more than, effectiveness. However, the theory is not very good at accounting for agency in decision-making. So, who actually takes decisions? Who has agency? Who can push things? Institutions don't just passively absorb norms. They're often arenas of conflicts and negotiations. I hope you found this video useful. Please support me on the channel, subscribe, ring the bell icon. You can go to Patreon or Ko-fi, or even book a one-on-one tutoring with me through SuperProf. Thank you for watching.